lesson number 2, modifiers. In this lesson, we will learn about the most important concepts behind modifiers, especially those you need to attack even the most challenging GMAT questions. Okay, so what are modifiers? Well, modifiers are words or phrases that describe or give more information about something else. And we have two types: adjectives, which modify nouns, and adverbs, which modify everything else, especially verbs, adjectives, and even other adverbs. Now, this is a brief summary of all the modifiers you will encounter in the exam. As you can see, you have adjectives, and adjectives, especially one-word adjectives, describe a specific noun. If I say the GMAT exam is difficult, the adjective difficult describes the exam. One-word adverbs usually end in ly. Take a look at this. You have to study diligently. How do you have to study? Diligently. In that case, the adverb describes the whole verb, have to study. Then you have prepositional phrases. Prepositional phrases begin with prepositions such as in, on, at, of, etc. For instance, the book on the table contains great information. On the table is a prepositional phrase that describes the book. Then we have present participles, and present participles are very diverse. You can have an ing word in the middle. For example, the woman studying for the GMAT is very smart. The phrase studying for the GMAT describes the woman. Look at the second example. Studying for the GMAT, who? The woman. So that phrase at the beginning has to make sense with the subject. What about an ing word after a subject-verb structure? For example, if I say, she studied very hard, comma, achieving a high score, well, that whole phrase can be a consequence of the main verb, of studied. And notice that this ing could also be seen as a clause modifier. It describes the entire clause. She studied very hard. What's the consequence? Achieving a high score. Then we have past participles. And past participles are verb ed modifiers or irregular verbs. They look like verbs, but they're not verbs. Remember that from the previous lesson? So for example, developed 4 decades ago. That phrase needs to describe the subject, the GMAT. So what was developed? The GMAT exam. Then we have relative clauses, and there are many of those. But the most important in the GMAT are that and which. Relative clauses usually start with a WH word. That is the exception. You can have when, where, and others. The general rule is that relative clauses will describe the noun immediately before them, most of the time. So the exam that I took yesterday describes the exam, versus the exam, comma, which I took yesterday, comma. Notice that which is set off by commas. Which also describes the exam. The difference is that a which clause is always between commas. It is considered a non-essential modifier. A that clause, when it modifies a noun, cannot be set off by commas. Finally, we have noun phrases. So, noun phrases can also function as modifiers. They can describe a noun. If I say something like an experienced economist, who is an experienced economist? Well, it has to be the student. So, the student has sharp critical reasoning skills. The phrase, an experienced economist, sometimes can be confused for a subject, but be careful. Notice that you have a comma here and then a subject plus a verb. That means that the phrase at the beginning was not the subject. It is a modifier. Okay, so we will analyze each of these modifiers in a real context from now on. So I'm going to show you real GMAT questions in which we will apply these basic concepts. Let's begin with question 1. So here, you must always look for the subject and the verb. Remember what we learned in the previous lesson. So Dr. Tonegawa, that's my subject, won the Nobel Prize for discovering how the body can constantly change its genes to fashion a seeming unlimited number of antibodies, each specifically targeted at an invading microbe or foreign substance. So let's look at differences. Once you find the subject and the verb and you understand the sentence, you need to look for differences, especially at the beginning, then at the end. Here you have seeming versus seemingly. Which one is better? Well, it all depends. All depends on what exactly you want to describe. If you add ly to an adjective, it becomes an adverb. That means that seeming is an adjective, while seemingly with ly is an adverb. Therefore, you need to think, should I modify a noun or something else? What is seeming describing? Well, you have a seeming unlimited number. That doesn't make any sense, does it? If you want to modify the word unlimited, which is an adjective, you need to use an adverb. Remember that unlimited is an adjective because it describes the noun number. So you can eliminate choices 1, 2, and 3 because you need the adverb to describe unlimited. Now between those two, which one is better? Look for other differences. You have all versus each. You also have at the end targeted specifically to versus targeted specifically at. Well, this is an idiomatic issue. Do you target to or at? And the right answer is at. You always target at. You never target to. Be careful. So that's the correct idiom. Well, another thing is between all and each, there is an important meaning difference. All means that all the antibodies attack one microbe. And that changes the meaning dramatically because the original sentence is telling us that each antibody attacks one microbe. And that's why the body can change its genes to fashion an unlimited number or a seemingly unlimited number of antibodies. Why are there so many antibodies? Well, because there are many different microbes. So it makes more sense to use each. Each antibody attacks one microbe. Let's move on to number 2. Be careful with the verb ing at the beginning. A verb ing phrase has to make sense with the subject. If I say using a Doppler ultrasound device, my subject needs to make sense or must be able to perform this action. So you have fetal heartbeats as your subject. Can be detected is the verb. And think about that. Can fetal heartbeats use a device? No, they cannot. That doesn't make any sense. In the second one, you also have using a device. And you need someone who can use it. My subject is still fetal heartbeats. So fetal heartbeats cannot use a device. That is illogical. Look at number 3. Detecting fetal heartbeats. Be careful here. What or who detects the heartbeats? Is it a physician? Well, not in this case. It should be the device. The device detects the heartbeats. So this doesn't work. In number 4, you have fetal heartbeats as your subject. Can be detected. Be careful there, because if you use the passive voice, it would be better to have by a physician right after detected. In other words, you should say heartbeats can be detected by a physician using a device. I don't like this structure. And also, instead of passive voice, it is better to use the more concise or simpler active voice. That means that a physician can detect is active, and that's better than heartbeats can be detected by a physician. You see, it's a bit shorter. E was the best choice. Okay, so question number 3. We're still analyzing INGs. Spanning more than 50 years? Something is spanning more than 50 years. What is it? Is it the subject? Mueller? Well, a person cannot span 50 years. So look at the options you have. You have Mueller, Mueller's career, Mueller's career, Mueller, the career. So after the word Friedrich, you need his career. You need Friedrich Mueller's career. So A cannot be the answer. I cannot say Friedrich the career, so E is wrong. I cannot say Mueller. So you must be between two choices. The second part is an idiomatic issue again. Began, in, began with, and then look at the end. As versus of being. Be careful with of being. That's usually incorrect. Of being, as being, for being. The word being is dangerous. Okay, so avoid it as much as possible. This cannot be the answer. It's not idiomatic. So it began in an unpromising apprenticeship as a Sanskrit scholar. This as means role or function. So that's the best choice. Let's move on to question number 4. When the ing is after the subject verb, it can represent usually a consequence, and sometimes it represents an explanation of the previous clause. But most of the time it's a consequence of the verb. So right here you have my subject is 5 fledgling sea eagles. So 5 eagles left. The eagles left their nests. What is the consequence of that? Bringing to 34 the number of wild birds successfully raised since transplant from Norway began in 1875. Does that work? Well, yes, it does, because bringing to 34 is a consequence of leaving their nests. That can work. Be careful with brings. Brings is singular and is not parallel. Eagles left and brings. Doesn't work. It is singular. I cannot use a singular pronoun because eagles is plural. Now be careful with the last one. Some people like E because they say, oh, the eagles left and brought. But be careful. The eagles did not bring anything. It was the action of leaving their nests what brought to 34 the number of wild birds. Okay, so we keep the original sentence. There's nothing wrong with that. Avoid changing the meaning to something like E. Number 5. Past participles at the beginning. When you have a verb ed or irregular verb at the beginning, it has to make sense with the subject. So, delighted by the reported earnings for the first quarter of the fiscal year needs to make sense with my subject, it. So, look at the splits. It versus the decision versus the company manager versus the staff versus a race. What makes more sense there? Who was delighted by the reported earnings for the first quarter? It's not it, it's not the decision, it's definitely not a race. So you should think between the manager and the staff, and it makes more sense for the manager to know that information, right? Also is active. The manager, subject, decided verb, which is much better than the staff was given a raise by the manager. That's passive voice. We prefer active, when the subject performs the action, active voice. So C was the best choice. Let's take a look at number 6. Sometimes it is useful to just briefly check the differences among the answer choices, especially when you have something that's short. You have which versus that versus which versus that versus having. And we know that which has to be between commas. Okay. The exception is when you have a preposition before, such as of which, by which, to which. In those cases, you don't need commas anymore. But here, there is no preposition. I need a comma if I want to use which. This is wrong. This is wrong. I need that. Why? Well, because I want to describe network. A network that keeps. I need to use present as well, because the sentence is in the present. Mammals can endure, that's present, what would be lethal levels of body heat because they have, that's present. So I need to keep it in the present. And this is the best choice. It's very concise. Look at number 4. It's worthy. That has been keeping. You don't need to emphasize that something is happening. Having kept is also incorrect. You keep that. Be careful with having. The word having is also, it's very tricky. It's called the perfect gerund, and it represents, similar to because. It represents the cause of an effect. And we will see this in a more advanced lesson eventually. But as a general rule, when you see having, eliminate it. Number 7. As a result of medical advances, many people that. Okay, be careful. The relative pronoun that, the same with which, can only refer to things, animals, but not people. Okay? In the GMAT, we use who to refer to people. You can say that's the more formal way of using it. In real life, you could use that to refer to people, but again, in the GMAT, avoid that. Don't use that for people, we need who. So we still have 3 left. Among those 3, B was the best choice. Why? Well, this is parallelism and concision. I prefer to use once rather than the worthy at one time, which is 3 words. Okay. I also prefer to use in childhood rather than the worthy when they were children, 4 words. Also, in childhood is parallel to the last part of the sentence, into old age. So in childhood and into old age are parallel. You're saying that people who might once have lived in childhood now live well into old age. In childhood, into old age. See the parallelism? B is better, shorter, more concise. We eliminate those 2. Okay? Then we have number 8. Here we're going to put together some concepts we have seen before. Take a look at this split here. And versus earnings versus earned. Another split is a time when versus a time that versus a time where, a time in which, a time when. You cannot use a time that, okay, because I prefer when to refer to time. When is a relative pronoun used to describe time periods. And where is used to describe places or locations. I cannot say time where. That's wrong. A time in which. Well, in which can replace when. That's okay. We still have 3 more to go. Now, if you have and she earned them, you're creating another sentence. So that's what we call a complex or compound sentence. 2 main clauses. The first sentence is the pilot, Jacqueline Cochran, hailed. That's my verb. The second sentence is she earned. But it's always better to have only one main clause, if you have that option. For example, in the last 2, you're using the past participle earned, and remember that past participles can modify the noun before this comma. In other words, earned describes speed records. Okay, so I would prefer to use a modifier rather than an entire clause. But there is something else that is wrong in A, an idiom that you must memorize. And the idiom is so plus an adjective. It could be any adjective followed by a that clause. That subject verb. So in A you have so new, and then there is no that clause. So new for, that's not idiomatic. In D you have so new such that, and that is not idiomatic. You need so new that subject verb. The subject is many of the planes she flew were. Subject verb. So E is the best possible choice. Okay, so again, you prefer to use a modifier rather than another clause, simply because modifiers are more concise, shorter. Okay. Number 10. We will analyze some noun phrases now. Remember that a noun phrase functions as a noun that describes another noun. So take a look at this beginning. You have architects and stonemasons, and some people may think, oh, that's a subject, but no, why not? Because then you have a comma followed by another subject. Huge palace and temple clusters, that's the subject. Were built, that's the verb. So if you have a noun phrase, comma, subject verb, the noun phrase is a modifier. And it needs to make sense with the subject. And look at the possible choices. Huge palace and temple clusters, without the benefits, the Maya, there were built, were the Maya who. Since you need a subject right after the comma, the only possible choice is the Maya. Okay, that's very easy, straightforward if you know the rule. Number 11. Okay, this is, I think, one of the most difficult concepts in modifiers. It is a special type of noun phrase that we call an absolute phrase. And an absolute phrase is the following. You have a subject plus a verb, that's your main clause, and after the comma, you can have a noun plus a modifier. That noun plus modifier, this whole thing, is called an absolute phrase. Okay? AP, absolute phrase. So look at this sentence. You have yellow jackets, that's my subject. Number is a verb. So yellow jackets number among the 900 or so species of the world's social wasps, comma. And then they repeat the word wasps. Wasps living. So that's a noun plus a modifier. Noun plus modifier. So that is a valid absolute phrase. But take a look at the differences. wasps, wasps, which means living. We learned that which needs to describe the noun before the comma. In this case, my noun before the comma is social wasps. I cannot use which because wasps, which means, doesn't make sense, and well, it also doesn't agree in number. Wasp is plural, means is singular, so that's awful. And the last one is not parallel. You have living in a society that is, number one, highly cooperative, organized, and after comma and, I need something parallel, and I have a sentence there. It consists, subject verb. So cooperative, organized, and it consists are not parallel. This is incorrect. Therefore, your answer is between those two. But most people eliminate 1 and 2 because they see the word wasps. And people think, oh, but you have wasps before the comma. You should not repeat it. But you could. You're allowed to do that. In fact, absolute phrases help you eliminate ambiguities. So A or B could be right. Between those two, which one is better? Okay, be careful here. The first one says a society where they consist. Where refers to, it could refer to society, that's okay, but I cannot say they consist because they refers to wasps. And wasps cannot consist of females. The society consists of females, not the wasps. Be careful. So A cannot be my answer. I need wasps that live in a highly cooperative and organized society consisting almost entirely of females. B was the best choice. So this is a highly advanced question. Let's move on to number 12. Because versus due to. This topic has to do with subordinators and modifiers. What I need you to know is that because will always describe the main verb of the sentence, whereas due to describes the subject of the sentence. So here you have, because an oversupply of computer chips has sent prices plunging, and that describes the main verb, has announced. In other words, why has he announced? Because an oversupply has sent prices plunging. That's the reason. So if I use due to, the whole phrase with due to, which ends in oversupply, has to make sense with the subject, which is the manufacturer. So due to computer chip prices from oversupply, the manufacturer. And that's incorrect, because the manufacturer cannot be due to plunging computer chip prices. What I need you to know is that you can replace due to with caused by. So caused by an oversupply, the manufacturer. The manufacturer was not caused by an oversupply. Therefore, I need because. And most of the time, if you are between because and due to, keep because. Okay? Keep because. Now, be careful with which. Which is describes the computer chips, and that doesn't work. The chips are not due to an oversupply. And which cannot be describing have been sent plunging, because that's part of a verbal construction. Which needs to describe the noun before the comma, or the noun phrase before the comma. So you can eliminate this choice and this choice and keep A. That's the best choice. Okay? So as you can see, there are many tricks, many things you need to learn about modifiers. And well, we're going to continue covering other types of questions, and eventually I'm going to show you some techniques to attack some more difficult questions. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a wonderful day.